Welcome everyone to another stream. And now today I'll continue my learning in another week, just like I did in the previous weeks. Today I will be studying about handling errors in FastAPI. And I just want to do one more check to make sure my audio is working well. It's all about my voice. I kind of got some cough, but let's go on. So they say handling errors. This text says there are many situations in which you need to notify an error to a client that is using your API. This client could be a browser with a front end, a code from someone else, an IoT device, etc. You could tell the client that the client doesn't have enough privileges for that operation. The client doesn't have access to that resource. The item was trying to access, the item the client was trying to access doesn't exist, among others. Yes, Linux, welcome to the stream. Happy to have you here. Let's carry on. So they're saying in these cases, you would normally return an HTTP status code in the range of 400 to 499. So this is what we looked at. I think was it in the previous stream on Saturday. Yeah, so those in the range of 400. Let's go on. Then they say this is similar to the 200 HTTP status codes from 200 to 299. Those status codes, those 200 status codes mean that somehow there was a success in the request. So the codes in the range of 200 simply mean things are going very great. Okay, something was good in the request, but these means there's something wrong. Okay, there's a client error. I mean, I've given examples here. Either the client doesn't have enough privileges, don't have access, or the client was trying to access a resource which did not exist. And of course, we are going to get into this soon. So they're saying the status codes in the 400 range mean that there was an error from the client. Yeah, just like I've just mentioned, the client error. And that's what we learned about also yesterday. Then they say, remember all those 404 or 404 not found errors. And of course, it's a common thing, joke in the software engineering world and everywhere, generally, there's people who know basic IT. This is 404 is very, very common, okay? And usually shown when a resource does not exist, but the client is trying to access it. So I'll go on. They're saying use HTTP exception. So they're saying to return HTTP responses. Wow, I'm gonna bite my tongue saying HTTP. So they're saying to return HTTP responses with errors to the client, you use exception. So you're saying import HTTP exception, and they're saying this works in Python 3.8 and above. So they're saying from FastAPI, import FastAPI and HTTP exception. We know about FastAPI being used to create the instance of our application. And then we have the new one that we have learned of right now, which is HTTP exception. And now we have a dictionary called items with a key foo and a string as a value. Okay, and then we have the path operation decorator having a path parameter. It's been long since we saw a path parameter. Finally, we have one. Then a path decoration function, okay, having a function parameter, and FastAPI will know that item ID should be assigned the value that comes from the path parameter, and it should be a string. So we know that with this, FastAPI will make sure it does the extraction, and validation, and of course add it to the docs. So you're saying if item ID not in items, they raise an HTTP exception with the status code being equals to 404, and the detail is saying item not found. Else they return items with that ID. Okay. In other words, if this ID is not here, okay. In other words, item ID must be a key in our dictionary. So we can test this. Excuse me. We can test this right now. And I'll assume my server. Yeah, It's still running. So let's go to localhost, documentation. Looks like something else is running and I need to stop it. I think I was working on some project somewhere. Where can I find it? Must have been right here in Casa, if I remember well. Not this one, should be another one. Yeah, this one here. Let me stop it. Okay, this is something I was trying to test out earlier. Yeah, so many women be celebrating. Oh, I've seen his .env. Don't worry. There's nothing secret here. It's actually a test. You can see what the secret key is, and this is. Otherwise, I would be screwed. Yeah, so let's go on. And you see, I was trying to test out what Casa can do. But let me go ahead. All right, so if I refresh this, we should now get a response from FastAPI. Yeah, and this is correct. So we see it's a get with that path variable, and we see it's called the path parameter. Okay, if we pass, let's say try it out, and we put something like bar execute, you see we get a 404, an error not found, and the response body has this JSON saying detail item not found, and that comes from here. Okay, from this, from this, the status code being 404, and then the detail saying the item has not been found. So when I scroll, okay, yeah, the rest is the same. But we can test one more when it's working. Okay, can say full execute, and here it says we get a 200, and then it says item the full wrestlers. Yeah, so I think this is awesome. This is good and makes total sense. Okay, makes total sense to me. So let me carry on with the tutorial. So when I come here, they say raise an HTTP status code in your code. But of course, we know that, okay? And if you know any basic Python, okay? Ideally, if you're doing FastAPI, you're doing Django Flask, you should know Python. You know that in Python, you can raise exceptions. So they're saying HTTP exception is a normal Python exception with additional data relevant for APIs. But I was going to start. Mehmet was telling me this is something I think I've done in Python. It's normal. Okay. So here they say, because it's a Python exception, you don't return it, you raise. Yeah, this makes sense. We raise Python exceptions, we don't return them. So they said this also means that if you're inside a utility function that you are calling inside of your path operation function, and you raise the HTTP exception from inside that utility function, it won't run the rest of the code in the path operation function. It will terminate that request right away and send the HTTP error from the HTTP exception to the client. Okay, so they're saying the benefit of raising an exception over returning a value will be more evident in the section about dependencies and security. So you're talking about a section down here, this one here, dependencies and security, where we're heading to very soon. So if I've understood this, I want to read it one more time and share what I've understood. They're saying this also means that if you're inside a utility function that you are calling inside of your path operation function, and you raise the HTTP exception from inside that utility function, it won't run the rest of the code in the path operation function. It will terminate the request right away and send the HTTP error from the HTTP exception to the client. So I think if I have like a utility, okay, maybe some function which the utility, maybe I've imported it, it's doing maybe, let me say, doing some magic, okay? And this function inside here will raise an HTTP exception, okay? This is the status code of 401, and then a detailed unauthorized access, okay? So just use autocomplete to help me do that. And then for some reason, maybe inside here, we are calling it, okay? Like this. We call this function. In any case, this, let's just say maybe we have some good code. Okay, let me just say good code. Okay, some good code here. But this good code, which is supposed to run on everything is okay, does not raise an HTTP exception. This return statement will be executed and the client will get the item. Okay, but in case line 16 is executed, okay, and probably we have, let's say, a line of code here, okay, another line of code there, okay, so many line of codes, and this happens, okay, and because we're calling this function here, which has this raise exception, these other lines of code will not get executed. The client would be given the error. Let's try it out right now, okay? So yeah, let's try it out. Save, come here, refresh this, come back, say go to try it out, okay? I can say full. Doesn't matter if I'm correct, okay? You see, ideally we get 401 detail unauthorized access. It just fails no matter what, okay? That's the good thing about this. And this is me just trying to understand this paragraph. So the path operation function is the whole of this, okay? All of this. And they're saying if any function, which is a utility function you're using, and that function raises an exception, the rest of your code in that function will not be executed, and the exception will be raised and returned to the client. Okay. So they're saying that we shall see this benefit more when we are studying about dependencies and security, and we shall be there soon. So they're saying in this example, when the client requests an item by an ID that doesn't exist, raise an exception with a status of 404. Yes, and this is the right thing to do. Okay, so here I was just assuming that probably they don't have access. Okay, but the best when there's no resource, use 404. And of course, if they are unauthorized, give them a 401. But we shall look at these codes even more soon. So let's continue. So it's saying the resulting response is saying if the client requests this endpoint, which we know, of course, an item ID full, the client will receive an HTTP status code of 200 and a JSON response of this, just like we saw in the documentation. Maybe to show you one more time, I can remove this, maybe Control Z very fast to get back to where I was. There we are. Okay, so simple if statement. So if I get back here, just to show you in case you joined late, if I execute, you see everything is okay, 200, and get the proper expected response. And now I say if the thing, but if the client requests, for example, items bar, a non-existent item bar, that the client will receive an HTTP status code of 404, the not found error as a JSON response of this detail item not found. And we saw it, maybe I can do it one more time. We put gibberish, execute, we get it, detail item not found. Okay, so here's a tip for us. They're saying when raising an exception, you can bypass any value that can't wait. When raising an exception, when raising an HTTP exception, you can bypass any value that can be converted to JSON as the parameter detail, not only str. You could pass a dict, a list, etc. They are handled automatically by FastAPI and converted to JSON. Again, if you've been following from the very first stream, by the way, this is the 19th stream. It's amazing how far I've come and how far we've come. You've come if you've been following from the beginning and learning with me. So yeah, we already know about this, okay? Expected. So you're saying add custom headers. So you're saying that there are some situations in where it's useful to be able to add custom headers to the HTTP error. For example, some types of security, you probably won't need to use it directly in your code. But in case you needed it for an advanced scenario, you can add custom headers. So let's see how we can add these custom headers for this advanced scenario that they're talking about. Okay, so this is it. Okay, so this HTTP exception has a param. Okay, you can pass an argument you can pass, which is headers. Then you can give it some stuff. Okay, so you can just copy this. Okay, and try to mimic it. So you're saying we can do stuff like this. We can say headers. Wow, how did this guy know that I'm supposed to do this? I guess the LLM has already been trained on the current code base. Look at this. Isn't this amazing that they know exactly what? All right. So, but header can be anything. Okay, I can put probably y data or y error, something like, okay, debug info. Let me just give them what they've suggested, because my mind right now is failing to generate ideas off the top of my mind right now. Yeah, but it's very simple as this. So if I hover over this, I want to go into this class and see what you can pass. Okay, it looks like it's not given here exactly. Yeah, so they can, you see, you can give status code, you can give detail, you can give headers. Okay, those are the values you can pass. And like we see, they've been annotated. Okay, even this one has been annotated. All right, let me not go into studying the implementation of FastAPI, but it now makes sense by just looking at their implementation and look and you see annotated, you know what it means. So I'll go down here. They say install custom exception handlers. You can add custom exception handlers with the same exception utilities from Starlet. Let's say you have a custom exception, unicorn exception, that you or a library you use might raise. And you want to handle this exception globally with FastAPI. You could add a custom exception handler with app.exception.handler. Okay, so it is a custom exception, meaning it is not built into FastAPI. Okay, just like this one here. HTTP exception is built in, but you want to use something which is not built in. So they're saying, for example, you have something called unicorn exception. And if you look here, okay, unicorn exception inherits from exception. Okay, and we know what exception is. It's the best class of all exceptions in Python. And then they have an init whereby they simply have an attribute, an instance attribute name, whose value will be name. And name is this argument here. Okay, so we say we have this custom exception and it must handle everything in the app, meaning it is global. So you're going to have a general operation or task. So, okay, so you're saying you can use app.exception handler unicorn exception. So you pass the exception here. Then they have the actual handler here saying unicorn exception handler has the request, okay, and has the exception. So at least in the bare minimum, we know that an exception handler takes in the request and then the actual exception and then returns a response. So you see status code 418 saying content, message, oops. Then they add the exception.name, did something. There goes a rainbow. Wow, people. So they have an example here saying if name equals to YOLO, raise unicorn exception. Okay. And the name equals to that names. Because unicorn exception, if you see, it expects a name. Okay. All right, let's try it. So this is just defining your custom exception. Okay. Then this is the function that manages that exception when it is raised. So when you raise this exception, which has been defined up here, this function will take responsible of it. And how will it take responsible of it? By using app.exception handler. That's the only way FastAPI will be aware of it. So let me copy this. I hope that makes sense. Please let me know if you think I've misunderstood it or you think you have a better explanation. So this is unicorns, okay? Then name. So I'm going to pass YOLO, okay? So a refresh, we have unicorns. If I pass that, I say try it out and then pass it YOLO like that. Execute. You see, we get it passes, okay? But for it to work, I have to use lowercase YOLO. So all these have to become lowercase like that. And if I execute, you see, we get error, I'm a teapot. That's what 418 means, okay? So this is, oops, YOLO did something. There goes a rainbow, okay? Yeah, so ideally, you create your custom exception by inheriting from the Python base class called exception. So this, we know how to create exceptions in Python. Then after that, raise your exception. But after you've raised your exception, make sure you have a handler, okay? A function which is responsible for managing that exception. And it's a global thing like they have said, okay? And I think you can add that a custom exception handler by using app.exception handler. Yeah. So I'll move with that. They're saying here, if you request unicorn slash YOLO, the path operation will raise a unicorn exception, just like you've seen. And says it will be handled by the unicorn exception handler, like I've just explained. And I hope I've understood it, but I think I have. So they say, so you will receive a clean error with an HTTP status code of 418 and a JSON content of this. And you have seen that. So we have here technical details. They're saying you could also use from starlet.requests import requests and from starlet.responses import JSON response. So they're saying FastAPI provides the same starlet.responses as FastAPI.responses just as a convenience for you, the developer. But most of the available responses come directly from starlet. The same with request. Yeah, super cool, right? Yeah, and good to know. So let's continue. So they're saying override the default exception handlers. They're saying FastAPI has default exception handlers. These handlers are in charge of returning the default JSON responses when you raise an HTTP exception and the request has invalid data. You can override these exception handlers with your own, okay? So let's find out how to override them. So you're saying override request validation exceptions. When a request contains invalid data, FastAPI internally raises a request validation error. And it also includes a default exception handler for it. Okay, let me read this again. When a request contains invalid data, FastAPI internally raises a request validation error. Okay, just like we have known, like if it expects a string and you pass an integer, so they'll raise this error. Okay, and also they have a handler for it, a default one. So they're saying to override it, import the request validation error. So we see they've imported it here. They're saying from FastAPI.exceptions import request validation error, and they're saying and use it with app.exception handler request validation error to decorate the exception handler. Okay, where is it? Yes, app.exception handler and pass the validation error. Okay, and then you can do whatever you want. So you see here they're saying return plain text response. They return a response, a simple. They change the exception to a string by doing this, and then the status code is 400, meaning a bad request. So this syntax is similar to what we saw up here. Okay, a function, then you register you attach it. Okay, you add it, I mean. Even here, the function which is going to help you to do the handling, then you have to add, okay, by saying upload exception handler. And you can see up here they've added another one. Okay, yeah, this is pretty easy. So they're saying now if you go to item/foo, instead of getting the default JSON error with this, okay, you will get a text version with this, okay, because you've overridden. So let me see. I want to copy all this. Okay, I save. With an endpoint here, refresh, open, try it out. Says, please correct the following validation errors and try again. Item must be an integer. Okay, so where is that? Okay, so you see this must be an integer. Okay, and let me look at the example they gave. What example did they give? Okay, this did not give us this, did it? No, it didn't. So what could be wrong? Okay, what could be wrong? So if I do this, you see, there we are, it passes. But we're supposed to what? To get this by going to item/foo, we're supposed to get something like this. Okay, but let's run it and we see. Again, one more time. Maybe there's something I've missed out. Wait, what am I doing? Okay. Foo. See, they say, please collect the following validation errors. For item ID, value must be an integer. Now, look at what I'm going to do. To see it clearly and to get this result, okay? This actual result, I'm going to do this because this is like a form. So automatically they're going to validate it. And in fact, before even going further, they won't allow us to do anything. So let me go to the URL and I do this. Instead of docs, I say /items/foo. Then if I expand this, now you can see, do you see this? Does it match this? Okay, it says input should be a valid integer and able to pass string as an integer. Input 4. Okay, so is there something I've missed out? Because I think I've done exactly as they have said. Oh, look at this, guys. If I say item equals to 3, let me try it out and I see. I'm curious why I'm not getting that plain text. If I say 3, item is 3 and execute. Okay. It's saying nope, I don't like 3. And that is what? This is what is happening. Okay. So is it failing because of this other handler? Comment it out, save. So of course this makes sense, okay? But the other one, because I don't know why they expect us to pass full, okay? Has someone understood it? Can someone let me know? And this is very correct, okay? Item ID must be an integer. Probably this was with an earlier version of their documentation and they have not updated it, okay? Yeah, but either way we get validation, okay? That's the win. That's the main concept. I think this has not been updated with what actually happens. Okay, so let's carry on. Let's carry on. I hope you all get the concept. So they're saying request validation error versus validation error. and they have a warning saying these are technical details that you might skip if it's not important for you now. Okay, let me just read it. It won't hurt. So they're saying request validation error is a subclass of Pindatics validation error. That's what we imported up here, okay, and used right here in the exception handler. So they're saying FastAPI uses it so that if you use a Pindatic model in response model and your data has an error, you will see the error in your log, okay? So in other words, it's helping us to have errors in our log if we use response model, okay? I hope you remember what response model is for. They're saying, but the client or user will not see it. Instead, the client will receive an internal server error with an HTTP status code 500, okay? So the error log, of course, is for us, but the client does not see. You simply get a 500. Interesting. The thing, it should be this way because if you have a Pindatic validation error in your response or anywhere in your code, not in the client request, it's actually a bug in your code. Okay? It should be this way because if you have a Pindatic validation error in your response or anywhere in your code, it's actually a bug in your code. Yeah, this is correct. And if it's a bug in your code, then the client should know that, yeah, the error has what? I mean, the server has a problem. It is not you having a problem. And they're saying while you fix it, your clients or users shouldn't have access to the internal information about the error, as that could expose a security vulnerability. Yeah, this makes sense. So we continue. It says override the HTTP exception error handler. I think the same way you can override the HTTP exception handler. For example, you could want to return a plain text response instead of JSON for these errors. Okay, so you can return a plain text response here from starlet exceptions, import exception as starlet exception. So these are the two things, but of course we know these, okay? Then they're adding a handler. Of course, actually added it already up this side, okay? They're just trying to explain it, I think, as a technical detail here. So the function, then they add the custom handler, which is the starlet exception, this one. And then they raise it, okay? They raise it, the exception this side, okay, which is basically the same thing, okay? Importing the exception and adding the handler. Then when you continue, you see another technical detail. You could also use from starlet.responses import plain text response. Then they say FastAPI provides the same starlet.response as FastAPI.responses, just as a convenience for you, the developer. But most of the available responses come directly from starlet. Good to know. So they're saying use the request validation error body. So they're saying the request validation error contains the body it received with invalid data. You could use it while developing your app to log the body and debug it and return it to the user. The request body, by the way, if you're wondering what body is, it's the request body. So yeah, the number of imports, but what they want is this, okay? Saying content equals JSON encoder, then they wrap it all into a dictionary, but the dictionary has two keys, the detail, then the body, okay? So they say exception.errors, and I think this function.errors gives you all the errors, the detail, so this the actual information that you need. Then the body from exception.body. Okay, so they're saying the request validation error contains the body it received with the invalid data. Okay, so body is simply an attribute of the request validation error. Okay, that's why you can say exception.body, and this exc is simply this, just a variable holding an instance of that error. So they're saying why you could use it while developing your app to log the body and debug it and return it to the user. Okay. So that the user knows that this body, what you sent to us, had the following errors. Yeah, this is very good. We'll appreciate. Yeah, then yeah, the rest are things that we know of. We know what this is. We know what this is. We don't waste time. So you're saying now try sending an invalid item like this. Okay, we can test it. Since I've understood the code, I can now test this. I'll copy that exact example, refresh this, and then try it out. Okay, and I replace that with this. We send, and there we are. Okay, get the detail. Okay, see the detail is this. That's the first part. Okay, then the second one is the body. So you're saying this, the body that had the issue is this one, and these are the errors. Let me see, for example, a message here saying the input should be a valid integer, unable to parse string as an integer. Notepad, exactly, saying you receive a response telling you that the data is invalid containing the received body. And there we are. Yeah. If you, I think they're this. Let me see. I think they're not exactly the same, but the same information. Because if you look at this, we have lock. Even here we have lock. We have message and type. Here we have message and input. Okay, type is type this side. Let me see. Yeah, it's up here. Type is int parsing. This one is type dot error, type error dot integer. I think they have changed that. Okay, the import is here, but this side is no import. So I think what we're using is latest, and they have to come and update the docs. But yeah, we get the whole idea what it's all about. Okay, that is the input, which was wrong, and it was a body parameter. What actual thing was wrong? It was the size. So the key was size and the value was Excel, and the message is this. What type of error is it? Int parsing. Excel was not they were not able to convert Excel to an integer. Which body had the issue? It was this body. So okay, I'll go ahead and saying FastAPI's exception versus Starlet's HTTP exception. Saying FastAPI has its own HTTP exception, and FastAPI's HTTP exception error class inherits from Starlet's HTTP exception error class. Okay, so inheritance there. This one inherits from this one. So you're saying the only difference is that FastAPI's exception accepts only JSONable data for the detail field, while Starlet's HTTP exception accepts strings for it. Okay, so ideally the detail here. Okay, this one for FastAPI can be converted to JSON, but for Starlet only strings. Yeah, so makes sense. So they just inherited from this one to create this of FastAPI. Okay, so then I think they had to do an override to make their own definition. So they're saying, so you can keep raising FastAPI's HTTP exception as normally in your code. But when you register an exception handler, you should register it for Starlet's HTTP exception. So you're saying this way, if any part of Starlet's internal code or Starlet extension or plugin raises a Starlet exception, your handler will be able to catch and handle it. Yeah, because it is the super class of everything. So they're saying in this example, to be able to have both HTTP exceptions in the same code, Starlet's exceptions is renamed to as Starlet exception. Okay. Yeah, I think we saw it somewhere. Even here, was it here? No, it was much earlier. Where was that? Here. Yeah. Just rename this so that they can have both. Okay. So you're saying reuse FastAPI's exception handlers, and you're saying if you want to use the exception along with the same default exception handlers from FastAPI, you can import and reuse the default exception handlers from FastAPI.exception handlers, which is this. So like here they've imported this one and then this other one, request validation exception handler. And then here this way they're using it. They're saying return await HTTP exception handler. Then they pass the request and the exception. So this one handles starlet exception. This one handles request validation error. They simply return these two. This one is returned here. This one is returned here, and they pass the request and the exception to it. Okay. So they're saying in this example, you are just printing the error with a very expensive message, but you get the idea. You can use the exception and then just reuse the default exception handler. They're saying in this example, you are just printing the error with a very expressive, come on, not expensive, but expressive message, but you get the idea. You can use the exception and then just reuse the default exception handlers. All right, looks good, looks good, looks good. So yeah, I think this is it. Yeah, having a bit of the technical details. So ideally, they say there's no need for us to read this, but yeah, I think it's good to know. It's good to know. So yeah, that's it, I think, for today. I'll continue my learning tomorrow. Well, yeah, I'll go to the next thing and so on and so forth until I'm done. So thank you for learning with me. Let's meet tomorrow, God willing. Have a good time over there where you are.